Hello, this is Freethought Forum, brought to you by the Rationalists of East Tennessee and the Atheist Society of Knoxville. I'm Joe Barnhart.
And I'm Rita Lund. And we are here today to tell you that if you don't believe in God, you are not alone. There are many people in East Tennessee who are freethinkers, agnostics, or atheists, and we hope that you might enjoy this program.
And if you do believe in God, you shouldn't be alone. And we invite you to engage in discussion with us. It is, we hope, a rational discussion. And today we want to talk about belief and skepticism and suggest they are the right wing and the left wing of a bird. You can't think without both believing and having skepticism.
Right, you have to have an original idea, and then you also have...
You may have another idea, and they won't fit.
Right, so you question, and there's basically skepticism.
Yeah, and skepticism is not some particularly atheistic view, or it's just an ordinary aspect of thinking. You always have some kind of skepticism. For example, when young women hear men propose or give them a good line, they need to be a little skeptical.
Right.
Look at the behavior and get references if you need.
Absolutely.
And in other words, we would teach our daughters and our sons, don't jump into marriage. It takes time to get to know someone. So skepticism is a part of ordinary, rational, responsible thinking.
Yes.
So believing is a part of ordinary living. You can't get along without having beliefs. And beliefs in that sense are expectations. And we test our beliefs every day, just in walking, if you go to put on a pair of glasses. In my case, I just go to the Dollar Tree and put on a pair of dollar glasses and say, yeah, this works. And other people try other things. And when you buy a car, you're skeptical.
Yes.
And you say after a while, well, they've tested it. Now, I believe this is the one I want.
Yeah.
So we're saying the same kind of intelligence applies in the field of religion and ethics.
Yes, everyday life.
Everyday life.
Yeah.
And so we have often occasion to have beliefs, and then they raise doubts, at least part of the belief, and so we have to reformulate.
Yes, and we're always gaining new information in our lives.
By doing
and, you know, one piece of knowledge builds on the next.
Yeah. Sir Isaac Newton said he built on the shoulders of others.
Yeah.
Because we all inherit a lot of beliefs and a lot of evidence, and sometimes we inherit some beliefs that don't stack up.
That's true. And many of us have beliefs that our parents told us. And that seems to suffice up to a certain point until we get old enough to maybe do some thinking on our own. And
I was lucky to have had good parents, and I'm discovering still they made a lot of good sense. I'm discovering I wish I'd paid more attention. I'm 83 now, but I still think my mother, who died at 41, had an awful lot of good sense. But I know what you mean.
We're both still growing up. We're works in progress.
Exactly. It's a good point. We're all in progress.
Yeah.
And whenever we think we know it all,
that's when we trip. Absolutely.
That's when we're brain dead, if you think that.
No, that's when you think you've really got it. That's when you trip over your own feet, and you know, and then we get our dose of humility for a little while.
Yeah, we could even, skepticism and humility go together, it seems to me. And because humility is seeing things, including yourself, in perspective.
True. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
And that's why we need other people. Because if we have only our own ideas, we start believing them all if we're not careful.
Yes. We just think we're top of the heap.
And my wife has a very pleasant way of raising an eyebrow.
Oh.
And that says, Joe, you might want to think about that again. And that's not confrontational, but it's a good way to give the message, you know. And it's a lot better than walking into the wall and learning. Well, let's...
You've got all these religious books here.
Well, I've got here one I thought... this is a very interesting book called Interpreting Abraham.
Uh-huh.
And...
so talk to me about Abraham, the man of faith.
A man of faith. Now, that's... what's interesting to me, in the story in the Bible, presumably God was going to destroy these Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
And Abraham began to say, well, maybe we could find at least 10 people there that are good and we won't destroy it. So he was raising some questions. Mm. Now, here's a story, however, same character, in which presumably this same deity told him to take his son, Isaac, who was not a little baby.
No,
he was asking questions.
Yeah.
So he's somewhat grown and could walk and ask questions and maybe carry some of the equipment. And they were going up to a mountain, and Abraham didn't tell the son right off who was going to be sacrificed. And the story doesn't indicate that he told his wife.
Oh, did he?
That's not in the Bible. So, can you imagine Sarah's...
reaction?
Yeah. I think her first reaction would be, you're going to do
what?
And then if he said it again, and she would say, have you seen the equivalent to a doctor? And she would have said, you know, this is, and it is nuts.
Yeah.
You know, going to sacrifice.
It's your own son.
Yeah. Or she might have been, like my wife said, well, maybe you just misunderstood. See, what's interesting.
You have a kind wife.
I have a very kind wife. She's very effective, but I like the way she is. And, but there's no report of her
reaction,
having any reaction, or that he even told her. And if he didn't, then this would be, to me, a violation of marriage vows.
Oh, yes.
First time, I mean, first-class violation. It's deceit and lying. This man of faith. And if Sarah then agreed with it, then she would be, it seeming to me, as nutty as he.
Right.
Now, the New Testament seemingly wants to imply that Abraham knew all along. It was the Lord was just kidding.
Testing.
Yeah, testing him.
Oh.
But that's not in the Hebrew Bible. That's way centuries later, somebody interpreting. Because the interpreter could see it's a little squirrely.
Definitely.
So, I mean, faith has to have some kind of rationality. Rationality behind it. Otherwise, it's just blind. And we all know how useless blind faith is. It's dangerous. So, skepticism is part of healthy living.
Right.
And faith is a part of healthy living. But they have to fly together. Without faith, which is simply another word for trust,
yes,
you wouldn't be able to operate.
No, I'm just thinking about, a very practical, everyday thing that everybody is involved in is driving a car.
Exactly.
You have faith that the people are going to drive on the right-hand side of the road, and they're going to stop at a red light, et cetera, et cetera.
And we go always cautiously.
Yes.
But nevertheless, that is a lot of faith or trust. And we've got enough to back it up to say it's not a bad risk that we take. Since we do have to travel, and then we have rules and regulations. And now we can see why moral rules and social rules and regulations developed. People have to act on faith. They have to do things. So rules and regulations are guidelines, it seems to me, so that people can make better predictions about what other people are going to do.
Yes, and that is all incumbent and necessary for there to be successful civilization.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It makes it civil rather
Yeah.
than warring.
Yeah.
You can say, well, I can expect this person to behave this way, and that is faith. We are trusting.
Yeah.
And we have rules that we commonly agree on. We have common sense when all of our senses go together. And then we have common consensus when all of our, the community, community comes together on certain rules and regulations and guidelines. And most of these develop out of the fact that we have desires and wants.
And needs.
And needs, exactly. And then these needs come about in relationship with other people's wants and needs, and so we have to sort out. And then all of our needs and wants are in a physical world that we have to operate, so we have to say, well, never mind the fact that we need or want this, here's the physical situation, can we have it?
Yeah.
Without paying a severe price.
So Abraham, skepticism.
If he had used more skepticism, as a matter of fact, you know, as I mentioned, he did have skepticism regarding Sodom and Gomorrah, but he simply lost it.
When it came to...
Yeah, I personally think it's a mythical story. I think it's simply invented by a good Hebrew writer who was trying to say we don't need human sacrifice anymore. Now, there is evidence, there are bones up there in the northern part of what today we'd call Israel, or the Philistine part, not too far from the Mediterranean there. A lot of bones there. They're children bones, and apparently they were actually practicing child sacrifice.
Oh.
And we do have some passages in the Old Testament in which they were continuing among some of the Hebrews. And so the prophets, some of them are denouncing it. So I think this story is a good story that they're buying the presupposition of a deity giving orders, but then here they're using that presupposition that the order is not human sacrifice, going against this view. And I think that's the way most of this ethics developed in the Old Testament, the New Testament, is through trial and error, what worked and what didn't work. Even the golden rule works better. If you have so much hostility that you can't have any empathy toward the other person, then you don't really have a community.
True.
You have a kind of a mafia. Give you an offer you can't resist.
Yeah.
And if you do resist, so now another thing I want to point out is that in the development of the Christian faith, you had some doubts among the apostles. If you read the first 2 chapters of Galatians, Paul and who are the others?
James, Peter,
and Peter are in conflict with each other. In fact, they got so bitter. Let me read you a little phrase here, if I can find it. Read that right there, would you?
But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he ate with the Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision party.
Okay. Now, here you have 2 parties among these early Christians, and they are pretty much at odds. In fact, see if you can read, and from, what's that say?
And from those who are reputed to be something, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those, I say, who were of repute, added nothing to me. But
That's pretty strong language. He's saying that these are big shots, but from Jerusalem, you see. But he's saying that doesn't mean anything to him, because he's had another revelation. He thinks he's gone up to this is Paul.
Yeah.
And he thinks he's gone to the third heaven.
Third heaven?
Uh-huh. Now, there are other passages in interbiblical literature that have got 7 heavens, but this was more modest. But anyhow, his point is that he believes he's got a revelation that is different from what James and Peter are teaching. And so he thinks he got his revelation from the risen Jesus rather than from the Jesus that walked on earth.
And went to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, exactly. Now, he's presumably talking about the same Jesus, but he's claiming he's got a later
update.
That's what it amounts to, yeah.
This is all very confusing.
Well,
I mean,
that was very popular at that time for, well, at least from, you've got the interbiblical period. You've got all kinds of literature, like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Enoch. Enoch those books are not even in what we call the Bible, but they're being quoted and referred to and treated as if they were Scripture. Later on, centuries later, you had groups of people in the church declaring what for them would be Scripture. And before that, among the Jews, you were trying to tone down, cut some parts out, and have others to be salvaged as Scripture.
It's all a man-made story, right?
It's man-made, sure.
Yeah.
That's my next point, and I think you would agree with me, is these divine revelations are in reality people trying to sort out and think through some of their problems.
Right.
And apparently you can't sell them too well unless you claim you got to. Now, I don't want to be cynical about it. I think that sometimes they so believe this that it was easy to get caught up into these, believing they have revelations. And that's what I think it was Feuerbach called them waking dreams. And I think I understand what he's talking about. My dreams are exceedingly vivid, and I carry on very intense conversations in my dreams. But if I took them seriously, I'd say these were divine revelations, because they are as real as
if you were awake and talking to somebody.
And my wife sometimes remembers that I actually barked in one of my dreams. I was trying to, I think, oppose this other dog who was attacking one of my grandkids, and I was barking at it, and I woke her up.
Your heart was in the right place, even though your words weren't.
This is why I love Mary Ann so much. She said, "Can you go bark in the living room?" I said, "I promise not to bark anymore." But
very good, Joe.
But I think these waking dreams were really important to people like Paul, and they weren't just off-the-cuff dreams. I think they were part of the thinking process.
Yeah, really concentrating. Just like someone say...
problem solving.
Problem solving, yeah. Like, we know a lot of physicists.
Exactly.
And they're always thinking about something.
Yeah.
I mean, you know...
well, there was one physicist, I wish I could, I don't know whether it was Niels Bohr, I'd have to look it up again. But he had a vision, a dream of being inside an atom, because they were dealing with subatomic particles and all, and he had a dream of it. And that had a lot of influence. Now, it isn't that he said, "Oh, God, I've got a dream, it's got to be true." He knew that this was his way of thinking.
Right.
And while he was thinking, his unconscious mind was trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And I'm saying the same thing. The Apostle Paul here is thinking he's got a divine revelation. But it seems to me he is trying to solve a problem. He's saying, if we want to import this religion to the Gentiles, well, we talked about this on this program before, then we have to make some revisions. We can't take it with Hebrew nationalism, and we can't have all the Hebrew customs like circumcisions and dietary. Those simply won't mark it, is what he's saying. And so he had a divine revelation that did away with that. And he calls it they use the word Torah, or the Namas, or the law. And he says he has the Torah or the Namas of Christ, you see. Well, that's a way of saying it's a new,
different from
a new
Old
model or
Testament,
even a new paradigm, new way of thinking. And it was radical. Some people claim that the real inventor of Christianity is Paul, and I would say he's the major contributor because he was trying to take this Hebrew tradition and blend it with a new culture, and that took a lot of creative activity to bring it about. Now, we may not buy all the presuppositions now, we're centuries later, but looking at it as a historian, you'd say, well, he's doing what we do today. We try to work out compromises and new models to solve our problems. And one of the problems he was trying to solve is, if you do wrong, what do you need? You need some forgiveness.
True.
You need to be accepted in the community. And then did you have to go through all these rigmaroles to be accepted again? Or is there a new approach? Why put them through this process when there's another process that the Gentiles can handle better? Okay, we've got a call coming in. Let's see. Go ahead, we have a call. Go ahead.
Hello. I was watching your show here about atheism TV. I thought I was listening to a Bible study here.
Go ahead.
But then you mentioned Paul.
Uh-huh.
And as you said, Paul was wanting to promote the religion, to sell it. And so would you not think that his dreams about ending circumcision and all that were just convenient? That maybe he didn't do that, he didn't dream. Maybe he just lied and said he had a dream.
Well, it's easy to say if somebody differs with me, they just lied. But I'm trying to not make him a liar. Are you with me?
Okay.
And trying to say, I think he simply was operating within the framework of his time, trying to solve a problem.
And the problem being that Christianity was not growing enough?
Well, the major problem was, it seems to me, is if people are trying to live a good, decent life, and they do wrong, then they have to be back into good relationship with the community. And so how do you get back into good relationship with the community? We still have the same...
Circumcised?
Well, if you're trying to follow the problem...
What really, what caught my attention was you mentioned the circumcision party.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't realize they had circumcision parties.
Well, what he meant by that, the writer, is simply a group of people. Here's what I think was taking place. You had the Gentile believers and the Jewish believers together, and some of the Jewish believers, not all apparently, were saying, now, if you really want to be part of this overall faith of Abraham, it would be better if you were circumcised, because Abraham was circumcised. That was
now another thing about it is...
Go ahead.
Abraham was circumcised when he was 99 years old. Now, I think most of us can agree, can probably, make a covenant that when I get 99 years old, I'll get circumcised. But selling it to someone who's maybe 20 would be much harder to sell.
Well, I think Paul discovered that, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah. I'd say people would say, sure, when I'm 99, I'm off with that thing. But this circumcision thing, it was such a big thing in the Old Testament. I mean, David collected the slimy things.
Yes.
He collected 200 of them.
Yeah.
And, Zipporah. Oh, you're talking about Abraham and his poor son.
Right there in the 4th chapter of Exodus, you got Yeah, see, we got
Well, how about Zipporah? The mother of Lot's son.
Oh, yeah.
She picked up a rock and circumcised him right on the road there.
Okay, so what
Now, as far as skepticism,
Go ahead.
skepticism, I think, goes greater in the generations that follow as they examine the beliefs of their elders.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see Abraham's son and Moses' son really being skeptical about some of the sacrifice and all. Abraham's son saying, "Dad, you're not hearing voices again, are you?" And poor Zipporah's son, every time she picked up anything that looked like a rock, he probably ran screaming, clutching his crotch.
Would you suspect they might have switched to go to circumcising little boys, very, very young?
What about, say again?
Hmm?
Would say it again? Switching to...
In other words, if you circumcise little boys, you don't get as much protest or skepticism.
Oh, you get a lot of crying, I imagine, but there's not a whole lot that an infant can do. I mean, they can't vote, and they can't pick up a rock and smash you in the head for cutting them.
Okay, well, then that was my point, wasn't it?
That if you're going to circumcise someone, do it to someone innocent who can't protest?
That's what you have in the 4th chapter of Exodus, yeah.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, regarding skepticism, something came on the news today, and I thought I'd ask you about it.
Uh-huh.
One of our Republican evangelists, I guess you'd call her.
Anyhow, we try not to get into politics, but go ahead, mate. Let's make your point.
This is religion.
Go ahead.
Religion. Michelle Bachmann has announced today that the rapture is near.
Oh, really?
Okay.
And I was initially skeptical about that.
Uh-huh.
But she explained that it's all Obama's fault. Now, when you're talking about exercising skepticism, maybe this is one of the places you think that we should.
Okay, let me mention that to you. When I was a teenager, the Antichrist was FDR.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
A lot of people thought FDR was the Antichrist, and there was an evangelist in town on Magnolia Avenue who preached what's called premillennial fundamentalism. And he was quite convinced that Christ was coming somewhere about the late 40s, in other words, he was quite convinced that FDR and his genre was a sign of the mark of the beast.
So you think that he was using religion to try to control politics at that time against FDR?
I think this particular preacher probably believed. In fact, I had an uncle by marriage who apparently quit work.
Really?
In order to do the preaching, and his wife did most of the real work while he went around preaching the second coming. But he thought Mussolini was the Antichrist.
I see.
So I'm old enough to have seen a lot of these. And the one you're talking about is just a new one.
Oh, she's maybe new, but not alone.
Not alone, not alone.
But it appears as though there's so much politics, religion, politics using religion to influence the masses.
Well, you got a good point. Religion sometimes becomes like a pair of scissors. You can use it for something good, or you can use it to cut people up.
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. I thought that I was feeling kind of sorry you weren't getting some calls here.
Appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Joe, I'm glad this young man called because he said when he started about, I thought I was on a Bible study program. And I was just sitting here thinking, listening to you and whatnot, but I also, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, now I'm the one that said that this is a program for free thinkers, agnostics, and atheists. And I'm wondering, let's make a connection here.
Okay, well, I'll make it real quickly. That if you are in a culture, then you want to examine it rationally.
Yes. And be skeptical about things.
And be honest about it as best you can, and be skeptical when necessary. It's just part of thinking, and that's all. In other words, just as other people come on other different kind of programs and analyze part of the culture, and we're doing the same thing from a different perspective, from a more naturalistic perspective, rather than a supernaturalistic perspective.
Yeah.
And what I'm suggesting is this skepticism is something that all of our viewers know about, because if we have good, solid Christians out there, most of them are very skeptical about the claims of Joseph Smith and all these women he married, some of which are younger than teenagers, which today would call child abuse.
Yeah.
But that was at that time. In fact, when I was married, or about to be married, they had this thing, I think I mentioned this one, in the ceremony, love, honor, and obey. Mm. And I told the preacher we could cut the obey out. I was marrying a woman, not a child. That just seems silly to me. But that indicates that's an old tradition, that men were actually marrying children. That is, teenagers or younger.
Yeah.
And you look at even with, I think I'd mentioned the Gone with the Wind. Butler is maybe 30, and he's talking about a teenager.
Right.
So that's why that phrase obey came in. They were marrying children. Now, what I'm saying is you have some of this in the Bible that women are to be submissive. That's Paul's word, submissive. And the reason is Eve, what? Sinned.
Oh, yeah, oh.
You remember?
Oh, yes. She gave Adam the apple.
Yeah. And brilliant Adam in this story said, I saw this woman sin. I think I'll do the same thing. And therefore he is superior. I don't think so. But that's the story. And if you buy it, okay. But I think there's where good, healthy skepticism needs to step in. That's not a basis for women being submissive.
No, I kind of like the idea that since we all live and breathe and, aside from a few separate areas, have the same kind of parts that make us work, we need the same things to stay alive. I don't see why women should be submissive at all. I mean, I really believe in equality, right, straight across. I don't want to be above anyone, and I don't want to be below anyone. I mean, I just want to look everybody straight in the eye and have them look me straight in the eye.
Yeah. Someone asked me once, Joe, who's the authority in your family? And I said, on what subject?
Yeah.
In music, I'm out of the picture. A lot of other things, I'm out of the picture. And on other things, I'm more of an authority than Mary Ann. Depends on the subject. Some things I'm learning from my 12-year-old, things I don't know. Right now, I'm glad to say she's learning about Copernicus. And I'm real pleased that the school system is doing this up there. She's learning about Copernicus and Newton, 12-year-old learning about Newton and Copernicus.
Chloe just had a birthday. She's 13.
As a matter of fact, she is just 13, turned 13, this month.
Thank you. I haven't sympathized with you yet on having a teenage granddaughter. I said it to Mary Ann the other day.
So far, she's a delight.
Good.
Okay. Now, but even in the New Testament, you'd have women that should cover their heads and not cut their hair, you see, because, and Paul says, almost remember the angels. Apparently there's a theory that angels, if they saw Eve being rebellious, that would give them the idea. And so, and that's the only thing we could figure out what that means.
I was thinking about something. And knowing I was coming on here in it, but I just thought, I was thinking about the question of Islamic women and covering their hair. Mm-hmm. But I thought, well, Hasidic Jews, the women, they cover their hair too. They wear wigs. Mm-hmm. They don't show their natural hair outside the house. They just choose to wear
that
wigs.
apparently was, from the Middle East, a part of sign of submission. At least it came to mean that. Now, what it came to mean earlier, maybe it's because the hot sun is good to have a bonnet. But what it later came to mean, in other words, something could function quite well in one culture, and then later on, it gets to be interpreted in some other way. Now, when I was a youth, women, if they went to church, they wore hats.
Oh, hats, gloves, too.
Yeah.
I have a wonderful collection of gloves.
You do?
Yes. I'm only 4 years behind you in age.
So, well, you remember the hats. And
Oh, hats, sure.
what I loved about them is the women, seemingly remote, they had some beautiful flowers on them. And I mean, you go to church with some of those hats, and you would look at the hats more than you would the preacher.
That's called entertainment.
Entertainment, yeah. But it was the notion that a hat was a sign of submission. And that goes back to Paul's...
Oh, see, I thought of it was a sign of respect in terms of dressing properly to go to church. One, I wore a hat and gloves.
That's a good example of what functioned in one culture or subculture and is translated into another culture. Then and by the time you were wearing hats, that meant it was a kind of dressing up, going out, and then that was being more formal.
Yes, you were always formal going to church.
Yeah, looking really good with a new hat.
No.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Middle East culture and the women covering their heads.
Mm-hmm.
And I had another thought. That could have been a man's claiming of the woman, not letting her, especially with the big long coverings all over, not letting her comeliness or beauty or her appearance show. It was his, like, claiming, marking his territory.
You had the veil. Remember?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Oh, I think
But-
you've got a good point, yeah. Matter of fact, I just talked to a Muslim. Oh, we got a phone. I talked to a Muslim recently. We got a caller. Okay, we have a caller. Go ahead. What's your name?
Hey, this is Carl from Central Illinois.
Very good, Carl. Go.
I didn't get near a computer, so I don't know what today's subject is.
Oh, we're talking about skepticism, and right now we're talking about being more skeptical about some of the views in the Bible about women.
And submission.
Well, that's real easy to do.
Okay.
I'm very, very interested in why everybody believes that Jehoshaphat's daughter went wandering around to all her friends, but knowing the fact that she was still a virgin and she was going to get executed by her father to keep a vow to the Lord and God. I mean, what kind of female of our species is that?
Well, that's a very primitive story. And if you remember, he was going off to battle, and he made a vow that if...
Yeah, to kill the first living thing that came to him from his house.
And he
got that.
Who?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the name.
This is Jephthah. And so this guy in the Old Testament thought probably some animal would come running to him, or he would meet an animal, but it was his daughter first. Well, in the story, it was his daughter who met him first. And so in the story, she had to go prepare herself to be slaughtered. That's what it amounts to.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think, now see, in putting together all these stories, what do you think the editor put that into the story?
To give an example of the dutiful daughter of a righteous son of the house of the tribe of Israel, and how loyal she was to her family and her God.
Well, you have a really good point. That does seem to be one of the subtexts, at least, that it's a woman's, or in this case, the child's duty. And in fact, there are some of the rabbis who were very praiseworthy of Isaac in a similar story when he was prepared to go ahead, and according to some of the rabbis, as they were trying to develop a spin-off on the story, they made Isaac more the hero than Abraham.
Yeah, but the whole thing about her, the only thing she was bemoaning was the fact that, she was still just a virgin before she got killed.
Yeah.
What I find ludicrous.
Well, what you're meaning to say, I guess, is that that's such different subculture, and it's almost always, if you're in one culture, you look on another culture and think they're ludicrous. But from their point of view, let's try to make sense of it, first of all, is from their point of view, she never got to be a full-grown woman. That's what that means.
Yeah, and the problem with that is that was the only thing that she was unhappy about. She wasn't unhappy about she was going to be killed by her father. She was unhappy the fact that she never got married and, all that. So I find the idea that the
Okay.
people in the Bible.
I don't find that part ludicrous at all. I found out that she didn't use an abstract word like life. She's simply saying, in living, one thing that she would be doing is getting married and having a family. In other words, she was taking life and giving it very concrete meaning. In that sense, it's not ludicrous at all. I would be ludicrous not to see it. Okay.
Then there was the treatment.
Go ahead.
Then there was the treatment of all those very young women that were taken as prisoners.
Uh-huh.
After they had taken all the women of the other tribe captive.
Yeah.
And all the little children, and what do? You kill all the women that had the children, and you killed all the boys. I guess they killed all the little infant boys as well.
Well, you raise a very interesting point, and one of the points is that keep in mind most of the Hebrew Bible, 99% maybe, is written by males from a male point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so the male seed is to be projected. And the women, we've said this on this program a lot, and this is pretty common sense now, but Abraham is great because his seed was to be like the stars of the sky. Now, that's a real male ego trip.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jacob, and here's Jacob thinking that his seed is going to be kings. And see, now this is a very male-oriented point of view, and women then don't count so much as the garage, which or the ground.
Yeah, there's a garage where they park their car, and that's about it.
Yeah, but it's the idea that a seed is just it's almost as if they're saying the male seed is already a person. And as soon as
the Catholic Church seems to think that way too.
Well, they did back in the 50s. I think they're a little more enlightened on that.
I hope so.
Today,
but then there's the how let's see,
Go
Jacob,
ahead.
I think it was, got his wife to pretend he was his sister and married that Egyptian.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
And how she willingly went along with it.
Well, that's
so
another.
That, they could shame him.
Yeah, well, I think a major point we're trying to make, and I think you're in agreement with us, is sometimes females turned out to be mere tools to the culture.
Yeah.
and the male ego, and we're trying to raise some skepticism about that. Now, Paul in Galatians talks about, see, Paul is shifting his thinking on this. He's in a different culture. And he says, in Christ, whatever that code word means, and we can figure that out in a minute if we got time, but there is neither male nor female, slave.
Neither a husband nor wife.
Well, no, that's not what he said. No, that is not what he said. It's male nor female, and there's neither bond nor freeman.
In regard to what?
In other words, in this new community he's talking about.
Oh, everybody's equal.
Everybody is equal.
Well, it hasn't.
Yeah.
That hasn't been translated down.
Well, because there are other passages that they can't. Those that don't like it use other passages. And that's what I'm saying, that religion is often a tool for people.
It's a tool.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you're not careful, yes. It's a tool for whatever people want.
Yes.
But there Paul is making it quite clear that there's neither male nor female. That's his own word. And see, I'm suggesting another possibility, that some of these anti-women passages in Paul's letters may have been written in later. By second century bishops.
And the bishops were all male.
Not only
Go ahead.
not only were some passages written in, but some people think that there was more than one author to the letters of Paul, the epistles of Paul, because they flat out contradict each other in places.
Well, you have what's called the pastoral epistles. That's Titus and First and Second Timothy. Those are said to be by Paul, but most scholars today think they are not by Paul. They're forgeries.
Yeah, there was one of his epistles where he says, "I'm writing to you this in my own hand, so that you know it's coming from me." So apparently, that author knew that there were forgeries out there.
Well, we do know that.
To ensure that it was true.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. Well, I want you to know how much we appreciate you calling in for us.
Okay.
Well,
We never took a break in terms of letting people know about.
Yeah, we need to give a phone call if somebody wants to call in. It doesn't know the number. It's 865-215-2288. I'll do that again. 865-215-2288.
And I thought I should mention something about, for example, the Rationalists of Tennessee meet on the first and third Sundays of the month at 10:30 to 12:30. And they have a book discussion at Books A Million on the second Sunday. And then there's a group that has a potluck supper, a potluck lunch, I should say, and reflections on the fourth Sunday.
Oh, good deal, yeah.
And every week, the Atheist Society of Knoxville meets on Tuesday evenings, starting around 5:30 at Barley's in the Old Town. And you can tell the group by the fact there's a big silver-covered book called...
Well, one of them is The God Delusion.
The God Delusion. I think that's the one that's up there right now.
Yeah.
And they meet every week for food and drinks and conversation. But if anyone wants to proselytize or preach or punch, please don't do it.
Don't do it. Well, let's get back to belief in skepticism, because if you read the history of theology, you see these two working together. Let's take the notion that Christians have. Now, the Muslims don't have this, and the Jews don't have this. But the Christian view is that you've got a God who somehow became a human being.
Right.
And Jesus is both God and man.
Yeah.
Now, and I remember as a kid wondering, now, is Jesus brushing his teeth? Is this God brushing his teeth? Well, no, these are human teeth. Now, Jesus, when he was a little baby, pooping. Is this God pooping, or is this, no, it's the baby Jesus. So I began to wonder as a kid, well, when is he God and when is he Jesus? You got to, now, one writer who was minister of a Baptist church in Houston, I can't think of his name offhand, but he think Jesus, by the time he's a grown man, couldn't make any mistakes. Anytime he said something, it had to be true. And he's treating as if he's just a human being who now is...
He's God on earth, literally. He's perfect.
He's perfect. He's omniscient. He knows everything.
Yeah.
You can't be surprised if you gave him a birthday party. He'd say, "Oh, well, thank you, but I already knew what was going to be here." So, in other words, he knows everything, presumably.
So he's faking it as a human being.
Well, in other words, if he is God on earth, then he can't be human. You can't be both. You got to make up your mind, because part of being human is to be fallible, to be finite and limited, and ignorant in a lot of ways. And if Jesus is not that, then he's not fully human. Now the myth is, and it's called the Creed of Chalcedon, that he is fully God and fully man
At the same time.
At the same time. And that sounds real nice, except it doesn't work. If you try to make it work, it just won't work.
I won't even bring in the Holy Spirit.
No, we'll leave that out, because you got enough of this.
Yeah.
And, well, you had, among the Christians, you had the monophysites who said, no, Jesus is just one nature. Mono, and physis means, nature. And, but you had other Christians that differ. So what I'm saying is Christianity has always had its believers and skeptics, and they go together. Each is a believer in his view and is skeptical of the other view. You can't have a view without being skeptical of other views.
True.
So all believers are skeptics, and all skeptics are believers. The real question is believing in what and skeptical of what.
I found one thing, and I was thinking about this afternoon, that the older I get, and I kind of like it, because I had a mentor, or I had a role model for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And my role model, Peggy, was 20 years older than I was. And she taught me an awful lot in those 10 years. And one of the most admired things about Peggy was the fact she was non-judgmental. And that's something that I on the one hand, I find myself maybe getting that way more.
Okay.
It's something I'd like to embrace more. And I think maybe some of it comes from the more I learn about anything and everything, the greater the ability to be less judgmental.
Okay, let me try this on you, see what you think. I find you very judgmental when it comes to ideas. I find you very tolerant when it comes to people. Does that make sense?
Oh, my brother-in-law is a perfect example. He could say that he didn't like gay people. He didn't, of any kind. He is a lesbian doctor, a gay podiatrist. He loves he gets along just wonderfully with all these people that he deals with on an individual basis. And they're all exactly, in this category that he doesn't really care for that kind of person.
Okay.
There's an example.
That's a good example, yeah.
Yeah.
He can have his opinion. Or you could be listening to me pontificate on some idea and say, oh, Joe doesn't make a lot of sense on that. And my judgment, and I'm using the word judgment, is he's just plain wrong. But you could still be very tolerant toward me as a person.
Oh, sure.
So...
Don't I do well?
Yeah, I can do quite well. You tolerate me real well.
I was just thinking, if I don't understand something, because that was your line when you said that I didn't really understand you, how can I be judgmental if it's something I don't understand?
I like that. In other words, you can't really disagree with someone until you know what you're disagreeing. Yeah. And so that means you have to be initially non-judgmental just to take in the idea.
Yeah. So tolerance and being non-judgmental, this is something that I'm giving to my free-thinking people that are listening, and that's in terms of, I just wish that those people of strong religious convictions around here could be less judgmental and more tolerant, just as I try to be.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
that's good. In fact, would you agree this? You welcome good criticism of your views,
Yes.
but you would appreciate accepting of you as a person and not judging your motives, since they don't see your motives.
Right.
To say, well, your motives are at least as good as theirs. Now, if you don't like your ideas, it's okay to criticize the idea,
Yeah.
but distinguish the idea
From the person.
From the person. And we all do this to some extent because that's the only way you can live with. I mean, I would not want my wife to agree with me on everything.
Oh,
What
no.
would be the whole point of being married? Be married to yourself, that'd be
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah.
But we can respect each other in our disagree. In fact, in disagreeing, if it's done properly, that does show respect.
Oh, yes.
That says, I think you've got enough sense to follow my argument, and here's where I think you missed the point, Joe. Let me give you my insight, and that shows me respect. And if I have enough sense, I'll listen. And that contributes to me. Then I say, oh, I didn't see that. Or, boy, you caught me in a contradiction. I've got to rethink. And sometimes you catch yourself in a contradiction.
Yeah.
And I've got, on this question, the historical Jesus question, I wrote my first paper, I think I mentioned it, in 1955. And I've revised it several times over the years. And I like the Jesus Seminar people because they're really good historians trying to nail down who was this particular person. And you could do the same thing about, Napoleon or anybody. Well, how much more time we got? We don't want to run off.
We've got about a minute and a quarter.
Well, this is a Freethought Forum, and we want you to know that we have an open discussion and are eager to have good contributors to this. And we take a position that, each group coming on TV has a different point of view. We come with a non-supernaturalistic perspective and see where that goes.
Yeah. And we were certainly roaming around the planet today with our free thinking.
Yeah, we hope so. But try this book, Interpreting Abraham. It's an exceedingly good book. And here's another book I'd want to recommend. It's called Paul and Jesus. It's written by New Testament scholar James T. Tabor. These kind of scholars are historians.
Yep.
Trying to see, well, what's being said, not whether they believe it or not. That's not their point. That point is, first of all, you owe it to a writer to find out what are they saying. Well, we hope you'll be with us next time.
Thank you, Sam, for your technical expertise.
And thank